So thank you all for attending the afternoon session of this December 4th UDAAP meeting. We have one item for this afternoon's review, and that is the return of the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum. So I'm going to pass it over now to Pavlina to introduce the panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to UDAAP. We're excited to see the development of the project. It's been a little while since we've reviewed it previously, but nonetheless, we look forward to catching up and seeing the latest developments. With me today, I have Mr. Osborne Anthony and Mr. Kevin Storm, both architects. Ms. Sharon Bradley, landscape architect, wasn't able to attend the afternoon session, but she should be able to provide some written comments that will be included in the meeting minutes, in addition to the rest of the panel. As a matter of just simple housekeeping, this being the second presentation of the project, it's important to reference the previous presentation and design, and specifically the comments provided by the panel and the degree to which various comments have been addressed. This will help us kind of bridge the understanding of where the project was previously, what has been studied in the meanwhile, and where it is today. Please try to keep the initial presentation relatively short, 20 to 30 minutes maximum. This will allow sufficient time for questions and answers, and then for the panel to provide comments. We can always dive into further detail on specific topics, so don't feel like you must focus on everything in that first run. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to your project team to begin your presentation. Thank you.
And Randy, we understand you're still trying to coordinate with Dr. Martin, so that's fine.
Rainer, did you send something to Dr. Martin?
Yeah, I told her my message was not, she didn't have to sign up for WebEx. All she had to do was use a browser selection.
And Rainer, can you work with Dr. Martin so we don't lose too much time?
Yeah, let me do that.
Thank
Randy, let me call her.
And well, we know it's critical that Dr. Martin be here. This is being recorded, so if by chance she is unable to join, we will have a recording of the presentation that we can share with her.
Sorry for the delay. Let me connect. Where is this file I want to connect? Okay. Full screen. What are we sharing here? Okay, how are we doing here? Are we?
So nothing is visible on our side yet. I think you probably need to press a share button.
Okay, I thought I did, but let's see. I'll click it again. Here we go. Keynote. How about now?
There we go. Success. We can see the entire screen, including like the left-hand side with the little thumbnail.
Okay, good. That won't hurt. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm getting used to this software. It's a little different than what we've got. I've got two different screens going. There we go. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to present the project, National Great Blacks and Wax Museum and Justice Learning Center. It's more than a museum. Our presenters today were to be Dr. Martin, co-founder and president of the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum, She was going to do a little introduction about the project. Rainer Wharton of Wharton Design Group, Kristen Gideon from MK Consulting, and I'm Randy Sovich with RM Sovich Architecture. Rainer was going to talk, you were going to talk a bit about the project and all the things that are going on. First step, I believe, Rainer. Are you there?
So he appears to still be on the phone with Dr. Martin.
Okay. So the project, as we presented last year, was still very preliminary. We wanted to get into this review quickly, then to get feedback, so we would have it moving forward. At the time, we were still sorting out what was happening with the program and with the site. So some of the comments specifically were about use of the land, and could we use the land for other development uses? And we didn't have a very specific program for the site area of 2 acres at the time. And then also how would we incorporate the stormwater management, what was going to be incorporated, and how would the phasing work with our massing of the building. So in that time frame, I guess if Rainer's not here, I will just keep it moving a bit. So the what's developed is that we were looking at the site as a campus for the museum. There are multiple buildings on the site that the museum will have, and we'll be adding a new building and possibly another outbuilding in the development. The idea is that the building will take people on a journey through history, as well as having the figures that are currently in the connection. Will be increasing the capacity from about 4,000 square feet of gallery space to 12,000 square feet of gallery space. The total addition is a 21,000 square foot addition, and it'll include community, educational, multi-purpose spaces. We'll talk about each of those parts of the project as we move forward. The site is the largest green space in all of our Broadway Cecil area, other than the cemetery, and so we want to keep the property, a lot of the property, green, and use it for storytelling. For the museum purposes. And the program is now being developed, has all those things listed on the right as community program. And I'm going to go to the second slide just for your recall.
I'm back, Randy.
Okay. Do you want to talk a bit? This is your slide, Rainer. So do you want to talk about what's been going on with the...
Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about, Randy mentioned about the concept of the museum as a campus. And we'll kind of make it clear that this idea of the campus is not merely a future approach or new concept, that the Great Blacks in Wax has and will continue to be really more than just a history museum. That, as you can see from the slide, on the left side is the Barschmidt Mansion, which sits on the 1649 North Avenue at Broadway, and then all the way at the other end at 1601 through 1605 East North Avenue is the historic firehouse and two townhouses which house the museum presently. That there actually are several significant organizations that are presently on the campus of Great Blacks in Wax, as Randy mentioned. It's about 2 acres, a little more than 2 acres. The first one is Justopia Group, which was founded by Dr. Japhus Doswell in 2001. Justopia is a biomedical and information technology company that's located in the mansion. They specialize in artificial intelligence systems, augmented reality, eyewear, wearable devices, as well as biomedical systems. They also have a engineers training program, apprenticeship program, for students who are majoring in computer science, information technology, and related fields. Justopia also is working with the museum in the technology aspects of many of its exhibits that will be in the new museum. A second program that's of real significance is the TEACH, TEACH, which stands for Transforming Equity Through Arts, Culture, and Health. It is a department of the museum founded by Dr. David Fakumile, who's a faculty member at Johns Hopkins University and Morgan State University. And TEACH uses arts and culture to promote health and racial equity in communities. It is also located in the Barra Schmidt building. They provide community-wide projects that use public art and community performances to really tell stories that will address local health challenges. They have art-based workshops and projects in schools and community associations, as well as they have a policy advocacy focus in which they use creative works to focus on societal problems and try to motivate decision makers to invest in equitable community resources. And finally, third, which is probably Dr. Martin's favorite program, which is the Summer Youth Works Docent Training and Workshop Development Program. In conjunction with Baltimore City, this program provides opportunities on a 6-week basis during the summer for Baltimore City students between the ages of 14 and 21. Those students will learn how to be museum guides, but as well, they are developing skills in critical speaking, public speaking skills, as well as interpretation and leadership. They do tours for the general public, but also for politicians and leaders in the area. And we find that this program has been very, very successful. And we're presently working on expanding this program to be year-round. And so the idea is that this and a number of other entities have been located within both the museum itself as well as the mansion, and will continue to grow and expand. And so this notion of the campus, I think, is something that has been and will continue to be of real importance. I'll turn it over to you, Randy.
Okay, there's just a diagram of the site. Area. The site does slope. When we were meeting the last time, I have to admit that I didn't have as much of a grasp on how much grade change there is across the site. There's a good 12 feet, 12 feet from the street level down to the bottom southeast corner of the property, and so that was something that we needed to recognize and address as we moved through. I'm going to pass this on to Kristen, because I think what we want to do is start talking about the site development.
Hi, Randy. Thank you. Good to see everybody. Really exciting project. We've been working very intensively on the site design and how it relates back to the museum and the storytelling that we want to do with the museum and its mission. As Randy mentioned, we've got about a 6% grade change across this site, so that provides us with opportunities to do some really nice things on the site, but we also need to make sure that we're being conscious of that. So as I said, we've been working on this very intensively. We've really compressed our slide deck here, so I will talk through some of these things. We did just want to give the framework on which we are working back from. Our key design principles is, biophilic design, that indoor-outdoor connection, and really making sure that people are out in nature and that they're in, that calming and restful aspect of nature is intricate into the overall design of the project. We also wanted to keep it fairly, I don't want to say simple, but it's a very minimalist design with some very important programming nodes that have been incorporated into the overall layout of the project. Certainly, sustainability and resilience is always at the heart of what we do. Very excited to transform what is, just a vacant lot right now into an ecological resource, a node in which biodiversity can really start to flourish in this area of the city. And then also just as a civic building and center, we also want to make sure that our project is also being very respectful of the public realm, and how does our project activate that public realm and engage it. And then, of course, this is a large site in the city, and so we also want to make sure that not only is our site safe and secure, but that it also continues to, in regards to where it touches the neighborhood, it also becomes a safe and secure area for that neighborhood, because we are surrounded by alleys on 3 sides, which can, maybe not always feel super safe, but we have thought about that a lot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then just as in regards to form and function, we did explore kind of 2 avenues for design, and one was kind of more of an angular layout for the site, and then one was more of an organic curvilinear shape. And as you see as we go through, I would say the more public spaces, we've really kind of leaned into that more angular sort of language, and then in the more passive edges of the site that where we felt like it was appropriate, we have introduced some more of those organic shapes to it. So it is a blending of those 2 things, but again, kind of the more public and active spaces, we've looked to use that more angular type of design, and then the more passive spaces that are a little bit on the edge of the site, we've introduced those organic shapes. So we're just going to kind of walk you through the different program elements, and then we'll do the big reveal in a couple of slides. But one thing we wanted to talk about first was obviously the public realm, and how does our project interact with what's happening on North Avenue. And so we really studied that in a couple of different ways. And what we've done here is we've used those angular language geometries to create these large welcoming pathways to the front entrance of our building. So we have so it doesn't feel like, it just feels like you're walking up a nice path to the entrance to our building. They are all ADA accessible, so no matter where you come from, you will be able to get into our building. It's a 5% slope or less. So we are thinking about the practical, but we're also thinking about how do we activate the public realm and draw people to us. We've also set our building back a little bit, and we have there's landscaping in the front of our building to help really soften that a little bit and to provide a nice grounding of the building to the site. You can also see directly in front of our buildings, the street trees have actually been pulled back onto our site. And that is also just, again, as a visual cue. Usually you see the street trees right along the street. Well, guess what? Something special and different is happening here. And so we've pulled those street trees back so that they're actually, on the other side of the sidewalk. They're still providing that nice, strong edge that we like, but it's not happening right along North Avenue. And then that also allowed us to have an area where we can do bus. At times we will have like 3 to 4 buses that will be coming, and that will provide a really nice area where the bus can stop and either pick up or drop off people who would be visiting the museum. So we really tried to think about all of those uses and how we're pulling people into the museum. And then you can really start to see that also we're thinking about the vocabulary of the materials. A lot of wood, a lot of Corten steel, very natural plantings, native plant materials, and then you can also see that we are starting to use maybe a little bit more contemporary or modern pavers that are long linear pavers. So you can start to see in these precedent images that the vocabulary of the materials that we are starting to use throughout the site. Next. So this is the Memorial Garden. This is kind of the heart of the project. You can see that it is imagined to be quite a large space that will have tiered seating. We do have about a 12-foot grade change from where you're coming out of the main level of the building down into the garden. So we have a series of switchback ramps and sloped sidewalks to get from what will actually be like an outdoor cafe area down the meandering path into the actual memorial garden. And you can see that there will be some sort of water feature, and there will be a statue that will commemorate the Martins' contributions and vision for this museum. And it's meant to be, some days it might be a contemplative place with just a couple of people in it, but then it's also meant for larger gatherings and celebrations and that sort of thing. So this is a big part of the museum, and it is kind of that first moment that you have when you come out of the museum. This is where you exit into the garden area. So you will also have a perch at which you will be able to look out over not only our garden, but over the city and actually into downtown Baltimore. So
Kristen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think you lost me a little bit, and I'm gonna probably think some of the other viewers as well. There's a lot of images on the pages. Some of them are plans, and I'm going to guess models. Others, I'm not sure if they're of the model or just examples of something. It's not really clear what's what.
Okay.
And on top of that, the views kind of and plans turn directions. And so it's really hard to follow. Who's driving the presentation?
We're showing referential images along with some of the studies that we're doing.
I understand that. It's just hard
right.
to understand what's referential and what is the actual study because it's not clear on the page. So I'm asking, Randy, are you driving the presentation? Are you sharing the screen?
I'm sharing the screen, yes.
So if you could use your mouse, please, and perhaps point to things as Kristen is describing, because she's moving at 1,000 miles an hour, describing a lot of different conditions and views and connections and interior and exterior and this and that. And we have no idea where those are or what image is referencing them.
I'm sorry. I probably should have been pointing, and that's my fault.
You're all nodding your heads, and I know you get it because you know the design, but we don't. So if you can just step back to the previous slide, and I think that one was general enough, and I understood that the bottom are referential images and the top is your plan. And we understood kind of what the trees are doing along the edge of the street and kind of the angular pathways. But there's no understanding right now for us between that image and the next one. Where is the entry to the museum? Where is that plaza you were talking about? Where are those ramps? So that jump between this slide and the next slide is losing us completely.
We will bring you to that. We are going to walk you around the building, and then we will get you to the whole. So just follow along. It will all come together. It will all come together toward the end.
But I need to understand in that next slide, because it's so zoomed in, cropped that area of the ramps, where on the plan, on the large plan, is that? Is that towards the garden? Do you have an overall plan you can relate to?
We do. We would like to walk you through the different components of the site, and then we will show you the whole site, and then you will all be able to see how it all comes together.
No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. We need to be able to reference what we're looking at. I have no idea what I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at pictures of a statue, a picture of a ramp with a dog, a picture of an amphitheater. I don't know if that's your amphitheater or somebody else's amphitheater. Then I'm looking at something that has a pool and another entry and a perch. And I have no idea if that's your building, somebody else's building, or where on the site this is at all. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't want to wait to go through other things that don't make any sense. We want to have a general understanding of what are the areas you're showing us. So if you don't mind pulling up an overall plan, it could be later on in your presentation, and just point, we're going to do this area, that area, and that area. That's going to help create a mental map for us to be able to follow along. Thank you.
We're showing you this area here. We're going to show you the garden, the Memorial Garden. We're going to show you the Heritage Garden. We're going to show you the Commons and the Woodland Path.
Thank you so much. This is extremely helpful. In that order, I imagine, kind of the right, the left, and then below?
More or less, but there are other things that we were addressing site-wise. So we have a lot of other images.
So we're now kind of looping in the back area through those various
we're
places.
going to move around the whole property. What our goal is to move around the property and then look at the property and then see how they all come together. So I don't know that I agree that you need to understand how it all comes together. If you just look at the different images that we're looking at first, which are inspirational and aspirational and things that we're also studying.
You don't have to agree. I'm just telling you that it doesn't make any sense. And now that you've shown this little diagram, it starts to clarify things. So now we can follow the general areas of interest that you're taking us on. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I could pull that up as a key, I think, somehow, but I don't know how to do it on this software.
No, this was helpful. This is it. We get it. We now have a visual map of what are the areas we're gonna talk about. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to cover anything else here, Kristen, before we? So this is a 3D massing of the garden, an idea for the garden as we're looking at. These were inspirational images that Kristen had brought up, and we had worked together. A sculpture like this, Sojourner Truth, is something like we would like to have. The logo of the museum is two figures with a book. So we're looking at different ways that a sculptor could come out and do two figures with a book, and then the pathway down to the garden from the building is something we'll talk about in more detail. But I think what Kristen wanted to cover here was the idea that there would be a terracing coming from the building to the garden, and then how we get there and what might be in the garden, and then places to sit, places to watch, places to remember, places for remembering. I'll let Kristen do the next one.
Thank you.
I'll be right back. I'm just going to get some water.
Okay, great.
And Kristen, just so I'm clear, the drawing on the left, is that your design? Right here in the slide.
Yes, so there's a rendered site plan, yes.
So on each drawing, there is the rendered site plan is your drawing, and all the other images are supporting the different components.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, there was an idea that there would be like basically an enlargement for that program area. Yeah. So this is a really exciting component of the project. We are going to be doing some rainwater harvesting as part of our stormwater management plan, and we're going to actually be capturing it in an above grade water structure. It's going to look kind of like a little silo, but that rainwater harvesting we will then use for what we're calling our heritage crop garden. And there are maybe 8 to 10 crops that enslaved people brought with them from West Africa. And a lot of those crops actually grow here in the Mid-Atlantic. And so the idea is that in this heritage crop garden, we will be growing those types of crops so that they can talk about how those crops were brought over, how they really helped people survive, and then how do we continue to use those crops today. So we really see this as a learning opportunity that also helps to understand the experience of the enslaved people as they came over from West Africa and then here in the States. So this is really an exciting piece of the project. It is located over here on the site because we felt like this was the part of the site that was going to get the best sun. So there was also some things that we were doing there. You will also, when you come down off of the back area, we have a deck off the back of the building.
We have no idea what any of that is, where it is or what it's facing or where the building is or what the programs are or why it's here and what it's doing. We have no idea.
We're just walking through the programs, probably not. We'll just keep walking through the program. And these are just program elements. We wanted to show you what we were thinking and show you comparing. We're not asking you to analyze these. These are to give you an idea of how it all fits together.
Yeah. So one of the organizing features of this space is what we're calling the commons, and it's a large open green space. A portion of it is sloped so that people will be able to sit on the side of it. But it's just meant to be this kind of large opening green space in the project that is supposed to in which the paths go around. You can see that it's anchored by what we're calling our performance barn. This is going to be kind of a 1.5-story structure that will have artists in residence perhaps in it. It may also serve as a movie night opportunity, but it's meant again to be a small outdoor structure that will anchor that space and can be used for a number of different programming purposes as the museum evolves and has continuous programming opportunities. You can see in kind of the lower right-hand corner, there's a rendering that Randy did with someone who's, sitting on the stairs in the Memorial Garden and looking out over the garden and the museum, and it kind of gives you a little bit of that experience that somebody might have when they're at the museum. But essentially, it's meant to be an open space that can be multifunctional over time.
Yeah, Kristen, I'm afraid that, we're going to blow through our time. We're 40 minutes into the presentation, and we're going to have to go through all of these slides again to really understand the design and whatnot of all those. I would like to request that we jump real quick to that site plan that you showed us originally and just orient us very quickly, just so we can understand some of these reference points that you're describing, the building, the back entry, where that barn is, where the garden is, just so that we can create a mental map so that when you continue to walk us through it, we can understand kind of what views and what conditions are. This is a design review meeting, so we need to be able to understand your work as clearly as possible, analyze it, and then be able to communicate. And I'm just afraid that we're breezing through these slides and there's absolutely very little understanding of what's happening. We won't have the time to kind of go through them one by one again. So it'd be very helpful if someone can just walk us through this mind map of at least where these different elements are, how are they related to each other, so that then when you reference them in those other slides, we can at least follow along. Thank you.
Randy, do you want to go to the slide that's right before this one? That's the more with the call outs for each of the design elements?
I think this is a better one because it's sort of more diagrammatic, if that's okay. So the site is going to have 3 buildings: the firehouse, the mansion, and the new building. They each will have their own uses, their own activities. There won't be exhibits, necessarily in the. There will be exhibits in the Justice Learning Center, but they'll be related to that program. There will be this isn't showing the master plan. This is showing phase 1. A visitor to the museum would enter the museum and they would be guided through the museum building in a sequence and come out to this side, and this would be where they would spill out. So your entrance to the garden space would be from this amphitheater, which Kristen has shown. From there, you'll overlook into the garden. You'll see the sculpture, which is visible from the alley. There's a way to walk down on grade without a handicapped ramp, or with a handicap ramp, but without steps to get to this garden. There's an amphitheater here. There's also an overlook here. As the site drops away, there's another berm along here, looking out into the garden. The walkway leads you down to the cistern, to the Heritage Garden. And then from here, there's a path that wanders through the woodland area. There's a gate here, which would be the door of no return, and a Griot circle place for storytelling. Stormwater management is happening in this corner location.
And the Heritage Garden, which I think we saw a slide of, is on that west side as well.
The Heritage is on the west side, right?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
And the site is sloping in this direction. It's sloping this direction. The low point is this corner. High point is this corner. The building is growing from the land as opposed to growing from the urban edge, but it does follow the urban edge in other ways.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. If we can jump now back, I think we paused at the barn.
Right, we were here.
Right before, and you were referring to, so I see at the top left corner is kind of where the garden is, and then the barn here, and I'm going to imagine that the overlook is north of that structure, so that then when we look at the render below, we're sitting at the overlook looking at the barn. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Okay, understood. Thank you so much. I can follow now the relationships. Thank you. Carry on, please.
Thanks. Great.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so these are some site features. Again, you can say it's speaking to some of the materiality that we're going to be having, lots of natural wood, lots of Corten. And one of the things that, Randy, do you want a little bit about the griot? The griot is a storytelling area, and so that's going to figure prominently. We're imagining that maybe we'll have, some tree stumps from the stump dump there so that they can move around, but that's going to be a very dynamic space. And then there is something that's known as the door of no return, and we do want to have that program element and moment in the garden. We're kind of almost doing it like a secret, and so that's also along the pathway. So again, there will be a moment at which we can also use that to tell the story in the landscape. And then there will also be a water feature that'll probably be in the Memorial Garden area, but water is a very important element in the African American culture, and so we really wanted to make sure that we had that incorporated. And I think also when you're in the city, it's kind of a nice white noise that you kind of have in the background. So we also have a water feature that's integrated into the Memorial Garden area and takes advantage of that grade change that's in that area. These are some sections that we did through the site. I think these really help to kind of explain some of the grade changes and how our site specifically relates to the public realm. The first section that you're seeing here is through North Avenue and through the main entrance of the building. So you get a sense of exactly how the sidewalk and the right-of-way and then the landscaped area relates to how people are entering into the building. Randy, do you want to talk at all about how the second story of the building and the facade of the building relates to what's happening along North Avenue?
Yes, we'll see that in the elevations, but the upper part of the second floor of the building is a community space with a balcony all around the perimeter. And it overlooks, to the south, it overlooks the city, but the idea is that it would be porous and visible when there are activities going on in the museum. So the idea is that it's more about connecting and there's transparency. And then as you move down the North Avenue, the building is a little closer at the ground level, and the grade drops. So you get a little bit more of a slope to the building, but there's more open space at the top of this building, of the building as well. So that Maryland room at the second floor will be a place where there could be community spaces, activity, events. And then, Kristen.
Yeah, so and then we did do we thought, I know it was really important to understand how the alley related to what we're doing with the building. And one of the things that we have agreed with the city is that the alleys are currently 10 feet wide. And when they subdivide out our property, they will actually have room to come back and build 16-foot alleys later on. So those will actually be functioning alleys that people can use for the back of their houses. So we are representing a 16-foot alley, and we're accommodating that in our design. But I really think what you can see is that, we've got a very soft woodland buffer, but there are still very clear sight lines from our site into the alley and the adjacent homes. And then there's also a clear sight line into our site that's buffered a little bit by the trees. So we really wanted to make sure that we're showing that we are addressing that we do have neighbors to us and that they might want to look in and we might want to look out, but we want to buffer that view a little bit. And then here you can see that there is a swale, because there will be a swale along that edge of the property to channel the stormwater runoff down to our bioretention area that's in the lower right-hand corner of the site there. So again, that was just, and then you can see that structure there is the griot and the walkway. And then we also have the last section is through the bottom of the site, and that takes into account the barn. And so you can kind of get a sense of the massing of that barn as it relates to some of the grade change that's happening at that part of the site. You can also get a sense of how that woodland walking path is interwoven into that woodland edge that's buffering our site and providing the nice green space. And then also we are proposing a 6-foot high fence line. It's just right now a black metal picket fence, and we're just hoping more that it just disappears. We really just want everyone focused on what is going to be happening with the plantings and the programming, and not so much about the fencing. And I think this shows that the fence does kind of just disappear. The next one is a little bit about the landscape typology. This gives you a sense of the 4 different landscape typologies that we're proposing. We have urban plantings, which will be in the more public kind of part of the project. We then have the heritage crop garden, which is another type of planting typology. We have the commons, which is the large open space. And then we have the woodland plantings that are the buffer around kind of the U portion of our site.
Sorry to interrupt. I see that those are color coded. Can somebody point to those in the plan?
Sure. So
thank you.
Yeah. So the light green, the urban planting, that's the light green. The heritage crop is kind of the olive green. The commons is that kind of more grass green in the middle, and then the woodland planting is kind of the forest green that is around the lower U portion of the site.
Got it. Thank you very much.
And then we just want to talk a little bit about, we'll leave this here at site materials, but just to let you know, again, very natural materials. We are thinking about lighting, all of those other things that need to get layered in. We're also trying to use like an organic or lock material, because we really don't want to use a lot of concrete sidewalk. We'd like to have really soft pathways, but we also need to make sure that they are ADA accessible. And then that walkway through the woodland path, we're looking to use like a flexi pave or something. Again, wanting to try and get away from asphalt or concrete and trying using materials that feel softer and more natural, but are still easy to take care of.
And these are all referential images.
Yeah. And then again, this is just a slide just to say we've got a lot of wayfinding to do, and interpretive signage and educational signage, and that's going to be a large component of the learning aspect of the entire program. So there's a lot of layers here that are going to get worked in.
Yes, and the garden, we're seeing the garden as a book of storytelling. So there'll be ways to walk through the garden, and depending on which way you go, it might be a different story. And also there may be elements at different heights for stories for different people at different heights. Kristen, do you want to?
Yeah. So this was just to kind of show you some of the work that we've done. We've clearly worked through a lot of different layouts and configurations to get where we are. So I don't want to go through every single one, but just to kind of show you some of our process on how we got from point A to point Z where we are today. This was also, we again just wanted to show some of our work. We did explore a couple of different options on the layout for North Avenue. And again, we kind of landed on the more angular language for the layout, but again, just wanted to show our work here if there's any questions. And then the Memorial Garden, we've spent a lot of time on. And again, we just wanted to show our work here that we really spent a lot of time thinking about different ways to lay that area out as far as pathways and plantings and accessible routes into that area. So, and then this is our master plan. And you can see, all of the different elements that have gone into this garden. So, it may look simple and minimalist, but there's a lot of different programming that has gone into it, and that we've hopefully integrated into it in a way that feels thoughtful and intentional.
Can you please spend 2 minutes and just walk us through this plan, just so we can match up kind of some of the things from earlier into the presentation, and specifically the areas of enlargement, and maybe talk about how these different pieces are conceived and related together. Thank you.
So the existing, if you don't mind, Kristen,
Sure.
existing fire station is here. Existing mansion is here, just for reference. New building is here. Future phases will link the whole thing together. And we'll talk a little bit about what happens in first phase. So if you're coming to the Justice Center, you would come here. If you're coming to the Boward Mansion for convention or for conferences or for special exhibits or for a wedding, wedding reception or a wedding, you could come here. When you come into the building, there is a lobby space, which is large because they get a lot of people who arrive by bus. Buses will park along the street here. I don't know, is my audio not working? You'll be greeted by a guide, a griot. You'll come into a circle here where there'll be an orientation theater, and then you would be taken through the museum personally with a guide called a griot, and there will be griots that may be electronic or maybe figures as well that will walk you through a journey through this portion of the museum, and then there'll be the Great Blacks figures will be here. You'll find your way through there. You'll come out this side into the Memorial Garden. Find your way down. You'll have axes that will line up to like the Griot Circle, which is right off of this walkway, or looking down over the sculpture, which is here. There could be a place to sit and think, a place to take pictures. When people come as groups, they can have their photographs taken together there. And then so you have your way to wind down. So whereas you're led by an individual through the building, you'll find your way through here and explore and discover through the garden. So you have the ability to walk this way or this across this way, look over into the common, down to the heritage space. I think we talked about this already. Parking for the buses is along the street here. Visitors parking is across the street in a common parking lot. There is service parking planned on either side here and here, and there would be a fence all around the property that would go entirely around that section there, not including the parking. Dumpsters location is in this corner of the property. And you can see there'll be a walk through here. There'll be a small ramp to get you from this parking lot up into the building and into the building area here. And we're still working on the programs for these future phases. This probably will be a youth program with maybe even a fitness space in it, as we could figure how it works with the whole overall look. The barn is designed so that it can have movies as well that could take place there. Phase one, there won't be buildings in these two areas, so we'll have the three separate buildings. And I think Kristen had a wonderful idea of creating urban meadows here. Here you can sort of see referential images. This is the barn looking over to the common space. We've got a structure that we're looking at temporarily for the Griot Circle, and then a figure that sculpture hasn't been designed at this point. Or looking from this corner here, where there's an angle in the paving, you'll see down to the barn and to the sculpture along the edge of the building. The phase one plan is rendered here, with the landscape really being a storytelling element to the whole process. So it's a building it's an urban building, and it's a building in a park. Master plan, phasing diagram, the massing of the building. These are the three elements that you'll have in the first phase. Rayner, I think, is working on with a separate architect on renovating the Boward Mansion, and there's funds available through the Maryland Historic Trust, and the firehouse already has a set of documents for renovation that are ready for permit, but won't be able to happen until this project is underway. So here's kind of the massing along the street. here's kind of how we see it elevating. There's some datum lines that carry through, and a lightness on the second floor compared to maybe some more closure on the first floor here. Here you can see the site, the whole site as we have planning right now. We just received a budget from Plano Cuden for the updated site plan, grading and stormwater management. What we want to do is put the whole site plan in with the stormwater management to cover the entire development of the site. So as we build later, the stormwater management system, as designed by Kristen and her team at MK, will be included in the whole budget. And I'll just keep walking through. So phase one will have the buildings on either side, and the new building. Here's a view looking kind of from the south, from the northeast. Here's a view looking directly across the street. Materials we're looking at are elongated Corso format brick, which is 18 inches by 1 9/16 inches high. So it's a long, narrow brick. We'll probably be blending those patterns. And then we'll be looking at using this graphic system designed by the museum's graphic designer as a metal panel system on the building. Here are elevations around the building, east, south, and west. And then here's some views looking from the different portions of the site at the building. And that is it. I'm really sorry that we couldn't have Dr. Martin here she had some final comments to make. I don't know if
She's here now. She was able to join via phone. I elevated her to panelist.
Oh, good. Okay. Dr. Martin, did you want to have some final thoughts since we missed you at the beginning?
Oops. Yeah, she's probably still experiencing some technical difficulties. So at least, like I said, it has been recorded, so we can share that.
Okay. And we have some appendix images of the tree planting plan, if you have questions about that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank God. I apologize. I'm having a lot of technical difficulty, but thank you for the opportunity to speak. How much time am I looking at? 5 minutes or less?
We're out of time on the presentation part. Please be as brief as you can. Thank you.
Okay.
It's
Well,
more of a hello.
For me, having being the founder, along with my late husband, Dr. Elmer Martin, just seeing the evolution of our story, of starting out as a traveling exhibit with 4 wax figures, and then moving to downtown Baltimore, and then getting the opportunity to be on North Avenue, deliberately so, and the opportunity to try to make a difference in the lives of youth, seeing youth who've grown up starting at 10 and 8 years old, and still being involved with the museum, seeing the ways in which the museum can have an impact on children who work in our Youth Works program, where we train them to be tour guides. Children who come in with no interest in history, and in a short 5 weeks, we turn them into the scholars that we know that they can be. And so that evolution, showing the power of the museum, the way the museum is essential, the ways in which we are fighting to make sure that our history is not erased, and that we work to make sure that we have a powerful story that needs to be told.
Great. Thank you so much for the background information. I remember the first presentation when you explained at greater length sort of the larger goals and the history of the organization, and kind of the different phases through which this project has moved over the years. So it's great to see it continue to get developed. And this particular forum here is a technical design review. So as much as, public presentations go, I encourage you all to share some of this work and perhaps spend a little bit more time on these other things that matter beyond the actual design or all this in terms of the programming, in terms of the mission and the things that the new museum would do. I'm pretty sure that would be very informative and inspiring and encouraging to the community in Baltimore at large. And perhaps you're already doing it, but it's part of the larger outreach effort that I think will continue to support the project, but it would also give it another venue where some of these ideas can be shared. The purpose of today's review is to really vet the design for this particular site. The UDAAP panel focuses more directly on the urban environment and how buildings integrate with that, not only with respect to their immediate site, but also with respect to their immediate surroundings. The goal for that is to ensure that long-term the city develops in a sort of coordinated fashion and that projects speak to each other and that they integrate into the urban fabric in a cohesive way. So from that point of view, it really is a lot less about, necessarily the programmatic part of it, so much as it informs how the space has been planned, both within the landscape and within the building. And I say that because I have to say that the presentation was a little bit disorienting. I think for a project that has the storytelling as a center point of its design, I think the story wasn't told very well here in terms of what's happening, why is it happening, how does it relate to each other. So I urge you to really reconsider that, because I feel like while there's really wonderful things happening in the plan, some of them may feel a little bit disconnected. And it is this idea of like, we're telling a story, but it's unclear whether the pieces have landed there and they have been sort of strung and stitched together, or whether there's an actual story and then the different spaces that you're creating are in response to whatever parts of the story are happening. And I think a lot of that could use a little bit more diagrammatic work. I feel like some of these have gotten developed pretty far along in terms of the building and the landscape, and a lot of sort of the other more diagrammatic or storytelling pieces somehow sound a little bit more like an afterthought, but it may also be simply just a function of how this was presented, kind of a little bit backwards. We typically see a few very high-level diagrams that are able to create an understanding of the overall approach, the big idea, the general kind of gist of the story. And then as we move through the various drawings, they tend to zoom in towards the end, kind of in greater detail, and really take us into some of these decisions. I think in this particular case, we sort of managed to stitch them up along the way. I say this only because I'm going to give the rest of the time here in this little segment for Q&A, for questions and answers from the panel in case there's something else that they want to clarify. But before we do that, if we can jump very quickly to those few slides that we saw of the enlargements before we saw the overall plan, I want to make sure that we appreciate the images that are on there, starting from that, and understand kind of, again, what's part of the design and what's referential. So this is an enlargement we concluded of the front of the building with some examples of this angular geometry. If we can go to the next one, please. So the plan on the left is where one would come out of exhibits, correct, in this higher elevated platform. The amphitheater slopes down into, is that the water feature at the bottom?
The pool's here, right?
So that 3D model is of your model as well. It's not just the plan. Yes.
The plan and this 3D model, this model is the plan. Yeah, it matches.
And then the ones above where it says amphitheater and liminal space, is that part of your model as well?
Those are referential.
Those are referential.
This is a mock-up of the figures that are there, and so the second floor of the museum, the Maryland room would have a
Okay.
stair that would come down and spill down to this figure here, which is coming down here in the plan.
Yeah.
So there's an interconnection between the upper level. From here, you'll see all the way out to the water. So you'll have this connection to the port, and also have multiple ways to be able to go down.
Yeah.
I don't mean to keep talking.
So differences are showing rated with with ramps, kind of as this continuous landscape architecture that allows for these multiple paths and navigating the slopes and things like that. But the image there in gray and the plan on the left is the actual design. Can I ask also that Maryland room that you were mentioning above, is that the same section that we saw with that canopy and an open space? But it was kind of facing the street?
This is facing the street, and it faces straight through. So this area is open all the way through.
Understood. So it's like an open air, but covered, and it looks into the street and into this. Okay, understood. Thank you so much. Can we move to the next one, please?
Mm-hmm.
So this is sort of to the west side of the building, and the plan on the left is your plan, and everything else is referential. But you're showing sort of raised beds, perhaps, and pathways that pierce that. Is that meant to be used? In what fashion is this space used? Who's gardening here? Who's maintaining it? Is it decorative?
The museum is maintaining it, and it would be educational. This is an educational space for young people to come that tour the museum. That the docents will know about the crops, that the heritage crops that would be grown here.
So it's more or less an exhibit.
There would be
It's an exhibit.
Club that
Understood.
would be a part of this process.
Understood. It's an exhibit. It's not an actual working garden.
It's not a working. It's an exhibit. It's comparable to John Brown's barn in New England.
Certainly understood. Okay, and one more.
But the cistern itself is functional because it's collecting the rainwater and watering the garden.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as the barn goes, the two images on the left are your work and the rest are referential?
These are three images right here.
Oh, the three. So
the
that
barn.
other one.
Yeah, the red barn. Yeah, these were barn images that were referential, but we like the kind of a Maryland profile for the barn, which is a double kind of tobacco barn.
Yeah,
because tobacco being one of the crops.
In your section, it appeared like a much larger building, but I see now that the elevation was taken from the side where you see the roof as well.
It was cut right through the middle, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it was cut through at an angle. It would look like a strange shape at the time.
Yeah, understood. And then the last one, these are now all references.
So this is the street, and then here the streetscape. So this would actually go at the neck a little bit further. It would go all the way through.
Mm-hmm. And then there was a plan of the building that explained kind of where the lobby is and where the exhibit space is. Is that the only drawing we have that explains the building organization and layout?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And are there 2 stories to the building? Is it on 1 story?
There's a second floor that's in this area right here.
Mm-hmm. And what's there?
And that's the Maryland room and bathrooms and support. So it's basically a repeat.
Only over that volume. So the exhibit space is just 1 story?
The exhibit space is just a 1-story exhibit space. It's a tall space, 20 feet high.
Can you
reference? It's only over this.
Yeah, sorry. Can you reference that in your elevations now that we understand kind of what the masses are? There's a 2-story mass and a tall 1-story mass. So this is the front.
So this is the Maryland room here. And there's just basically bathrooms, then elevator and connection to the future phase. So a lot of open space up here. There is a balcony that is more or less perpendicular to the street here, or parallel to the street. So this kind of picks up the street edge. In other words, right here, this is picking up the street edge. And then if you go to the back of the building, then this is the gallery space and then the museum Maryland room and the museum common space here. So as you step down, you've got the gallery space, and then you've got the upper floor of the museum and then future expansion on either side. So kind of from here, this view here, you see the back is the museum space, and then there's the Maryland room, and that's just the building spilling down here or here.
So there's the amphitheater space on the right, and that goes into the circle down with the statue. And then there's the ramp, the overlook is right there in front of the building.
Overlook is along here.
And then
this
the
gentleman
great
right
lawn.
here is the guy that you were seeing looking out at the barn. That is him.
And there's no trees there? There's no canopy, or are they removed just for the render?
They're just removed so you can see them.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, and then the other one is to the left. We're standing lower into the landscape with the barn in the foreground, and then the building is up the hill. So great lawn overlook the back of the building.
Right, and this, as you recall, that section that Kristen created was it showed how much grade change there really is there. Yeah, dropping into the alley. Okay. And I think it was just one more render maybe that we can, the top right, where are we there? This is the Maryland room. This is the stair coming down to the fountain. This is the meadow space here. And then this is the walkways that take you down. So you could step down, you could wander down through planting. These steps become graded landscape as you round the turn. I see. It's really the same space as the one on the left. It's just it looks so exposed on the right, but I think it's because it doesn't have the addition. This is phase one. Right. It doesn't. So it doesn't show the firehouse. You don't have a continuous kind of street wall there. We'll have a fence there and that's a fence. The fence and the mellow. And so then from there, people will be able to get views into this garden as they walk along the street. It will be very transparent and open from the street. Okay, understood. Thank you so much. I think it was very helpful to take the time and walk through these. I would really like to request for future presentations at UDAAP to really follow a slightly more step-by-step process in presenting this. We do see a lot of projects, all the time, and it's really helpful to be able to follow along and just take your time explaining and pointing to the different things. So it helps us appreciate the work rather than missing it. It's if a slide is just on the screen for 10 seconds and the landscape is color coded and there's a lot of labels on it, there's not enough time to read all of it. I think it's really helpful to understand it and hear it from you, which is why we're in a live presentation. You get the opportunity to tell us the story. And the other thing I would say is it's really helpful to separate reference images from your own work. In general, reference images should always be credited. You're using other people's work on those pages, and especially when you create these ambiguities where it might read as your own work, that's when it becomes problematic. You should always be clear about what's your work and what's somebody else's work. And that also, again, will help read the slides and know what you've designed and what are some of the things that inspired you. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask the rest of the panel if they have any remaining clarifying questions. Kevin, what are your questions for the team?
Thanks, Paulina. You got a lot of them. I agree. I had a completely disorienting experience, trying to follow this this presentation. It's really, I think it kind of left me with a list of 100 questions. So I'm not going to go there for the whole list, but I do have I want to step back and ask a few fundamental questions that I just didn't understand. I think it's always helpful to see first of all, I do want to say, the mission of the museum is so inspiring, and I loved hearing the director's remarks at the end. Thank you for that. And but that's is very different. That's a very different sort of bucket of inspiration and commentary than what we're really focused on right here. And I think that we're interested in sort of how this place sort of meets its urban edges, sits within the neighborhood, contributes to its neighbors, how it deals with just the basic functionalities about do people get in and out? How do service get in and out? Where's the loading dock? Where's, if people are coming on bikes or cars or walking, if like, I think you began to address the alley a bit, but just having like site plans that show that, I think is like, just like a fundamental, like just like the first thing that we need to see basically. So maybe to that point, I feel like I saw a site plan where there were more buildings on the site, and then it looks like in your final plan, like you're tearing some buildings down. So could you just clarify that first of all, like how many buildings are being torn down for the master plan, and why are they being torn down?
There's only
that's the first question.
Only two row houses are being torn down. This is the master plan.
Yep.
And in the first phase, these two buildings in brown and that circulation in white next to them will not be built until a later phase. They're future phases. So the future phase, these will be meadows until we can build the future building.
So you are tearing down like two row houses, right? Are they?
There's two row houses that are there now, right? They are here.
And can you just talk a little bit about like, I mean, what those are buildings that you own, obviously, right? That the client owns, and they're just being torn down because of why?
They won't be torn down immediately. President Obama is in this building right here, right now. They're being used as exhibit space. They do need to have major renovation to them, and they have different floor levels, and they don't really work for the future phase. But as far as the project that we're presenting, kind of in terms of for that we're planning to move ahead, which is this building. They could be there until another time. They were planned to be torn down as part of another project that wouldn't have gone through this necessarily through this review process.
Okay. Well, I mean,
that's not a good answer.
Needs to be go through. I think as someone who works in sensitive historic settings and neighborhoods, I think that it's so if you're tearing something down, it's like the doctor saying like first do no harm. I think the community or in general, like especially when there are two buildings that would arguably, I think most people would agree, sort of contribute to the historic character of an overall neighborhood, while they may not be like rising to the level of national landmarks themselves. I think it's just important to explain why they're being torn down. And I think especially in the context of this museum, I mean, there is an entire history of urban renewal where supposedly blighted or slum neighborhoods of slums, which were often predominantly African American, were sort of torn down just because they weren't quite up to date. And there was this whole vibrancy and authenticity and rich histories of neighbors that were just sort of wiped to the ground. So to be a museum, of your particular mission, and then sort of also just sort of coming in and tearing down buildings and leaving them as quote unquote urban meadows, that's really, it almost sounds like a rehash in some weird way, ironic way of like urban renewal. And I know I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think I think these are very important decisions, and they should be explained in a very thoughtful way. And if the buildings can be used, it does actually add a layer of authenticity and history and idiosyncrasy and unexpected, relationships. And maybe there's elements of a program that do work in row houses. Maybe there's offices or back of house or whatever. It's just something to consider. And so that's sort of like question one. And then the question two is like, why is the building just sort of like angled? Like I think there was that one slide you showed where there was like all these like 4 or 5 different iterations, and ultimately you decided to kind of break the street line and have a building that's sort of set back and it's at a certain angle. I mean, I'm less interested in it from a sort of an architectural style perspective, but more of like what it does to the street front, like what it does to the urban edge of the continuity. What is the message? Is it you want to have a building in a park? You want to break that street edge? You actually want to convey that there's 3 separate entrances with 3 separate meanings, but that's not somehow, I didn't see any indication in sort of like signage or how people understand what the different buildings are. Like, how are you communicating this sort of 3 distinct parts that are separated by these urban meadows, which will essentially be just like, I guess, like grassy surfaces, right, that are look like a building was torn down, because you're not going to plant like lots of trees and then tear them down in 5 years. So yeah, if you could just talk a little about like what is the message of that urban facade, that urban edge that is 3 distinct pieces set back and at a very specific angle to the street.
So the first question about tearing the buildings down is that was something that was done is not part of this project. That was something that was planned in advance, but ultimately that will be decided in phase two. Those buildings, whether they stay or they don't, they're part of the Justice Learning Center, and they're really not part of our scope. We have just assumed that they would go because there would be other, there'd be a plan for another building there. There was a whole block of buildings here, but they were in a lot of decay. Some of them were owned by the city. There were 72 lots, which we talked about at the last meeting last year. So I apologize for not rehashing it, but there were 72 lots here. We have an LDA with the city to develop the whole parcel. And there's a need for the extra property to be able to develop fully into a program for the museum over time. But the idea was to do the project in a phased step. Originally, Kevin, I don't know, we talked about this at the last meeting. Last year was a long time ago. We didn't want to bring it up again, but there was a plan for 120,000 square foot building that would have gone here, that was planned by Davis Brody Bond. And what we've done is we've come in and we've said we want to build it in phases, and we're going to make it connect more to the landscape. So as far as the building being set back, we want the building to be to have some presence, because it's a streetscape here. We wanted to have a break in the streetscape, so there's a place for people to gather. There could be 4 or 5 busloads of people coming to the building at a time. There were just 4 buses just recently here to this building, and they were parking in this zone here. So they need to be able to have a place to come out, to meet, to be oriented before they come in. So we have a lot of people coming in groups. The museum is known nationally, maybe more than it is locally. The site itself, as I said in the very first, pointed to in the very first slide, the grades are really going in this direction. So as you start to fit to the site with a 1-story building, and you don't want to have a building that's 3 feet in the ground and 5 feet out of the ground, we turn the building this way so that it becomes one with the ground as opposed to one with the city. And we're bringing out the agricultural history of the site and of the building, and of the storytelling. Agricultural is part of the story that we're telling. So by taking the building and orienting it to the southeast, it has an identity. It's subtle. It's a subtle angle, but then it allows us to have an overhang here, so we have a covered entrance from the street. From the streetscape, so we end up with a covered area in the front of the building, and even all the way into this side. And there's a transparency that happens with the building as well. Not sure if that's enough of an answer.
No, it is. That's
There's a strong geometry from the ground that is oriented this building and strengthening and setting the shape of the building. And so then what happens is it comes from the ground, and then it comes back up and meets the city line, as opposed to mindlessly following the line of the street.
Got it. Okay. No, it's actually really helpful to hear. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, it's not an arbitrary angle like on Charles Street, where we just.
And then last question, I promise. Can you just describe, where does loading happen, and then describe those 2 little parking lots? Is that for staff? Is any of that visitor? What? It's all staff.
Handicap bathrooms, handicap parking is here for people coming in by vehicle and have a handicap space. The major parking is already shared. It's in a contract with a neighbor. And then there's parking here. It's all off-site, and here we have parking and loading for below this future phase. The site's dropping this direction dramatically as well. So our floor here at ground level would be at the same level as the museum the mansion here. So we would be able to carry straight through into the building here, but we would have a handicap ramp and elevator kind of connecting in.
Presumably you have large bring in different like changing exhibits or catering or that kind of like where do those
It's
come in and
usually
turn
a
around
van, usually just with a van right now. Everything would be done with a van. So
okay.
access would be here or here, no large trucks.
Okay.
The original scheme that was done by Davis Brody and Bond had parking back here and all the loading and coming in underneath the building. But we wanted to keep as much of this site green as possible and able to be used for other public events, for festivals that happen in the community that sometimes happen on the street. So this space becomes this green space here. And the meadow space, I take issue with your saying that having an urban meadow. I mean, we were just at the um, Calder Museum in Philadelphia, and there's a spectacularly beautiful meadow, urban meadow, going to be happening right on Benjamin Franklin Parkway there in Philadelphia. And I don't see why we can't have something that's beautifully planted with flowers that could be, as Kristen's been imagining here. So I don't think it has to be just a lawn that's getting mowed. It can be we had some photos and they didn't get put into the
I
presentation.
mean, it's a tremendous area. Like it's a big area that needs to be maintained and planted, and it's also behind. It sounds like from you said, it's behind fence.
It is.
Yeah,
Which
and
is
I think there's a
similar.
lot of.
If you should look at the Calder Museum plans because it's a wonderful kind of a thing that can happen, and that is much smaller than what's happening at the Calder Museum.
Okay. Fair enough. All right.
It's a small area of a few row houses, but I take your comments. We'll take them into consideration.
Yeah. All right. Those are all my questions. Thanks, Paulina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your questions for the team?
Sure, just a few. What's on the across the street on North Avenue? What does that complex really look like?
And I'm sorry, we did a presentation with all of that earlier, so I didn't repeat it. But there is a one-level shopping center across the street.
Got it. Okay. And then my second question is, so you're introducing community-related use, understandably, but it seems as though quite a bit of the functions are going to occur outdoors. Aside from the alley that's separating the back side of many of these, seems like townhomes, are you concerned about noise, use, music, etc.? How does, what are you thinking about in terms of mitigating that sort of interaction or that immediacy to the backyards of many of these homes?
That's a very good question. I mean, the people who live in the houses will be concerned about the sounds coming from the garden and the events there, as well as the people in the museum will be concerned about the sounds in the reverse, and that is what is the definition of being good neighbors, I think. I don't, I mean, that's.
I don't mean to be
build a wall. No, it's okay. It's a good question. We thought about it. I mean, some of those houses are not in very good shape. And, but I mean, I moved to Baltimore in 1979 and I saw them building Harbor Place and I looked across the harbor and said, look at the backs of those row houses there. They look terrible on Federal Hill. But now, people have changed what they do, because of the context. So the people who are in these homes will have a wonderful amenity that they can look out over, and hopefully that there'll be a feeling of community.
Okay, and then related to that, so we've seen a lot in terms of presentation related to everything that's outdoors, but and I think Pavlina kind of alluded to this. We haven't really seen much related to the programming other than just some references here and there to understand, the relationships between outdoors and indoors. But my immediate feeling is, the museum, it's really blacks and wax. And I feel as if I got a tour on, a landscape project through some kind of a botanical garden. So my question then is, what happens to all of these outdoor spaces and uses during inclement weather in the wintertime? What happened? The museum closes? How does it work? How does it function?
Well, the museum still works. The museum is open year round. The garden is a supplement to the whole process.
May I address that a little?
Absolutely, Dr. Martin.
The story is within the museum. We're talking about 250,000 years of history, where we tell 5,000 now. We're talking about a story that begins with Africa, the birthplace of humankind. We're talking about taking visitors on a journey, and that's the way we refer to it. A journey that will take us through African kingdoms and empires and the kind of history that you don't get. We're talking about a museum that will not start the story in slavery, as many museums do. So again, going back to prehistoric Africa and bringing the visitor through a powerful journey in which and a compendium of wax figures that help to tell the story as well. Inside the museum, the garden space and so forth are designed to complement what is going on in the museum, to tell a story, weather permitting, but again, focusing on the journey, focusing on galleries that help us to understand our contributions to medical, the medical profession, or galleries that help us to tell through our Justice Learning Center. But again, inside the museum.
And thank you, Doctor. I really appreciate that response. And, by no means do I ever think that the objective here is not noble. I think it's very special. I think it's necessary. And I think, the work that you and your team are doing is certainly appropriate, certainly in this time. However, I will say as I go through my comments, there are a couple of things I need to address related to the procession associated with, how you move through the facility. What exactly is the objective here? I understand it isn't just about the exhibit. It's telling more about a broader history, an important history. So just stay tuned and I'll address those at some point. Those are my comments. Those are my questions. I'm sorry. Pavlina, back to you.
Thank you, Osborne. And thank you to the project team for answering our questions, for indulging our initial clarifications of this project in our Q&A section. We're going to move into comments for the project, and I would like you to hold your comments and responses back. I just don't want it to turn into a debate, but please take note of things that you want us to know. I will absolutely give you an opportunity to share some additional thoughts. I just want to make sure that we're not interrupting each other, and then we can go through the comments and we'll hear you out, and then everything will get on the record. I think that will probably be a pretty smooth way to go through the last bit here. I'll start with some of my comments, and then I'll hand it over to the team in the same order that we came and kind of loop back around at the end if there's anything left to address. In general, I think, compared to the previous level of development of the project, this has come a long way in terms of both, like you said, understanding the site a little bit better, understanding or at least developing the program and the use, and really filling up the site with more program. I feel like when we first saw it, there was the kernels of some of these ideas, but the site certainly looked bigger than what the program appeared to be at this time. And I realized that this is still a phased approach. Therefore, there's portions of the site that are yet to be developed later. But with the development of some of this landscape program, the site certainly feels a lot more intentional and a lot more meaningful to the purpose of the museum education center and kind of the larger civic purpose of this establishment. So I think it's definitely moved in a better direction in the sense of giving purpose to this larger kind of piece of land left in the heart of the block, because our last conversations last time were like, these are the toughest places in the city to work with. They tend to deteriorate first because they're not facing major streets. They're usually kind of alley shaped. And, you know, every neighborhood has struggled with how to fill them in over time, except for the neighborhoods that are, you know, overbuilt, in which case they have plenty of structures there. So to your point about what's a good neighbor in this scenario and providing kind of a catalyst and some kind of area around which things can coalesce and create value so that other people can sort of develop that value from there. I think that this plan is a lot more successful than the previous one in a couple of ways. One, there's still a fence kind of fencing the entire property, but the fence isn't objectified, right? Last time it was going to be this like really ornate designy thing, which in and of itself drew attention to the fence itself and the act of fencing off. The strategy of underplaying the fence and in fact treating it as a simple sight fence, right? That kind of delineates edges of property and holds things together is probably a better approach to it, because it is meant to be something that complements the landscape rather than something that objectifies edges. So I find that a stronger kind of direction overall for the larger portion of the back. My only question here would be, you know, kind of a little bit more on the how it's done rather than, you know, whether it's done this way or not. I think the section currently showed the wider alley and then the fence and then the landscape. I wonder if the fence, you know, happens maybe 5 or 10 feet in from your property line or from where the alley is, just so that there's plantings on both sides. I think it would be interesting to see that the fence is a little bit more integrated into the vegetation. I think it doesn't even have to be full, like 10 feet. Sometimes even 5 feet allow for some kind of low plantings to still bridge it, and then it really starts to feel lovely and integrated, and it goes a little bit stronger with this naturalistic edge that you're creating on the inside of the block. So I'm encouraged about this approach. You know, if there's no structures in the middle of the block, you know, if you've taken on to the approach of like, no, we're just going to develop the edge along Northern Avenue, and then this southern edge and the sides is more naturalistic, then I really feel like you should play that up a little bit more. It's almost as if, you know, that fence should feel like it's part of a continuous meadow and not just the edge of it. I think that would strengthen your overall approach. In general, really, it wasn't articulated in your presentation, but I think it's there because I see it kind of even in your plans zoning, kind of planting zoning and things like that. There's this transition from a hard urban edge into a more naturalistic one as you move deeper into the site. I think it's a really interesting gradient. I believe it's part of your story, although I didn't see it yet like fully realized, and maybe it's just part of iterating and developing it further, but perhaps it is about this journey that sort of takes you from the reality and sort of the urban edge and the arrival point, and the museum filters you through these ideas of history and identity and things like that. And then when you emerge on the other side, you're in this other world. And even that transitions from something a lot more structured into something a lot more natural. I think it's such a strong concept, and it just needs further developing, and it needs more clarity. And perhaps the way is that it's around these things, and that's what I meant, like they individually are very strong, but they still don't feel somewhat connected. It's almost like, and there's this, and then there's that, and there's another thing. It's sort of episodic like that. And I wonder if if those are the good stopping point in terms of programmatically, but then really what you start developing from here is that sinuous connection. So, for example, transitioning from the building and that landscape architecture that we saw of the ramps and the terraces and things like that, do they just stop on the edge of the woods, or is there that zone of transition where landscape and structured landscape kind of start to interweave, really to allow for this gradient to not only be visible, but experienced. And like you're showing towards the end, that loop towards the bottom is just a path, And I think some more work in sort of that storytelling and that continuity would be really interesting. And then also, if that's indeed part of the museum tour or the museum path, then it's important to really curate the rest of it and sort of like the ending point as well. If it is more about a multinodal thing where people are sort of moving along and kind of discovering different areas, perhaps less so. But right now it wasn't clear to me if I, let's say, go for a walk and I loop around the bottom and I arrive maybe at where the garden is, do I just take the ramp back up and go to where I started? Or is there another point of reentry? I say that because I've been involved on projects where that becomes a very philosophical kind of decision in the design process of like, if this is about a journey and if this is about really taking somebody through this experience, do you want them to end where they started, or do you want to in fact deliver them in a different environment, be it back into the beginning of the museum as a matter of closing that mental circle? I think that's something that you can continue to maybe, I don't know, interrogate as you develop the design and see kind of what's more appropriate here. But in general, I see the beginnings of a very strong concept in the site plan and the overall organization. I would just encourage the team to really embrace it and be very strategic and thoughtful about it. And then some of these events, I would call them, that happen along the way, the greater circle, the sculpture, the barn, the this, the that, become these episodes and this part of the story in different event kind of happenings, but that continuous experience in the park would be that much more important as a whole. That's sort of on the overall approach to the concept. In general, I feel like each area is thoughtfully conceived. I'm looking forward to it moving from, it's the ramps and the terraces, just like this one image, into something that's like very specific to this and that becomes of the site and becomes unique to this project. And I think it will get there. It naturally happens to projects as they evolve. So this is kind of the beginning of the ideas and the concept. And I saw that Kristen shared a few different studies. Like even if you just look at the amphitheater area, there was a few kind of different formal studies that were done, a circle and a wave and a this and a that. I think you're at a point where it benefits to commit. So if you've committed to this geometry, now from here, it's important to really allow that to iterate and really get to a place that becomes special and embedded and endemic of this site. I say that because when you showed me the renderings of like kind of that area, there was this like really unexpected scale of the third dimension that I experienced in 3D that isn't visible in plan here. In plan here, and even in some of the enlarged drawings that you showed, it felt a lot more intimate. It felt like you're coming out of the building and you're in this like cascading plaza of geometries, and there's like a focal point there. And at least in this plan, it felt, maybe because of the vegetation, contained and like defined, and you're in a space. And all of a sudden, when we looked at the 3D, the building looked really large. The stairs looked very long and steep. And then there was the flat meadow, right? Like the image on the right. There just wasn't that connection between, and it might be just a function of like, these images are just modeling the building and they haven't really quite modeled the landscape and the vegetation right now. But this feels like grand and big versus kind of a flat land on the other side, whereas the site plan looks cradled and defined and you're in a courtyard sort of scenario. So I think some of that would be helpful as it continues to develop, that the study happens between the 2D and the 3D, and it starts to incorporate the landscape as designed, even if it's just placeholder trees, but they create these walls of a space, softer walls, but walls nonetheless, that start to contain things. Like for right now, I'm not really sure that coming off of this big stair and then looking into the meadow and then the back of the fence and all of that is really giving you that sense of being into a space. It feels very open, eroded, and kind of undifferentiated. Like there's a label of it in the site plan, but when somebody's there, there's just a lot of things happening. So I buy it. I think the site plan definition feels right now a lot more convincing in terms of space making than the 3D yet. I think you just have some work to do in kind of making the two really sync and talk to each other. So that would really be the next step in a lot of these different moments to, you know, if you found the shapes that you want to work with, now it really has to be about how does the space feel and how people are going to use it, and let that kind of continue the shaping of what's there. The part that I have probably the greatest issue with is the front, the North Avenue edge of the site. I mean, I think others have mentioned, and I think you'll hear it probably in a few different ways. If you could please hold on to just for a little bit longer on the site plan, just so I can refer to a few things. Thank you. So the difficulty obviously is that there's two possible additions that aren't happening yet, right? So for the time being and as conceived, the site feels fragmented. It's a full city block. There's a smaller building on each end and a larger one in the middle. How do we make it feel like there's just the pieces missing are not missing teeth, they're not vacancies, they're intentional, they're part of this experience? I think that would be the hardest thing to do, and do it without having, like Osborne said, plant a bunch of trees that you're just going to tear down, or even an expensive fence and things like that. So I look forward to seeing this developed in a way where the urban meadows, as beautiful as you're envisioning them, as I know that they can be, are perhaps not the afterthought of like, what do we do with these vacant sites, but are part of your original idea. They would have to be a low investment solution, like a meadow, but integrated with everything else that's happening right now. Because there's something about when you showed us the plan with the additions there and described kind of the drop-off plaza and stuff like that, things made sense. And then you show this and suddenly it doesn't. So I think there's a moment at which you can design the first phase, start there, and make sure that that plaza doesn't feel like something separate from the meadows, but rather a continuous sort of space. Just the way the fences work and the way the approach works, do they blend, do they morph into each other? And then sort of say, okay, and at some point these buildings will come and the meadows will disappear, and this is what the result will be. I think it's important that the phase one is designed in a way that feels intentional also. And if we could go back to the zoomed in version, or even the one, yeah. The only other issue that I have with this front area is that it really, like the planning of it feels very arbitrary to me, because we talked even last time at the presentation of how do you position the new building? And I remember maybe at that time you shared some early studies where it was a little bit more to the left and connected to one. I don't know if you studied it being a little bit more to the right, but the question certainly remains. Where is that building relative to the existing ones and even to future additions? And I guess we didn't see a study that rationalizes, or at least in any way explains, why you chose this particular location with that particular angle. And it's really hard to understand that this is the best solution for the site, because we just don't see the rationale behind it. I can understand maybe why you're angling it. I can probably understand why the two volumes are shaped the way they are and sort of sliding. But again, there's no information. There's nothing that really helps us come to terms with what we're seeing. I am mostly concerned with the fact that the building is so fragmented from the other two, and then the whole street edge is also fragmented. And then there's these like diagonal paving things that I don't think go anywhere. I see that one goes to where there would have been a tree pit, another one goes to where the other tree pit is. Like, I see that you see these images of projects that do these angles and things like that, but they're more intentional. They, more often than not, they connect different things or they use different sight lines. They're not just the shapes. And it seems to me like there's a lot of shapes drawn here, but they don't seem to necessarily do anything or connect anything. They're just like visuals. And I know that they're trying to bring people to the entry, but bring them from where? From the edge of the planted area? So I think that this whole front area, but not just starting from where you've put the double doors, but starting from the edges of the block, how people will arrive, because this is an urban site. If this was the suburbs and you were somewhere in a field and in the middle of the lot, entry in the middle to that building and then do a paved path to it, that would be okay. But you're in the city and there's urban edges, blocks, and legibility that are endemic to not just this city, but every city. And this particular solution doesn't really address it in any way. I buy the whole idea of pushing it back. I buy the idea of angling it. But to what end and how does it even connect to anything is completely unclear. Right now, there's two small buildings that anchor the corners, but that there's no connection between them or the corners of the building or that particular location of the building, or what happens in between, or how one even ends up to that door. It seems like it's designed for someone to just unload that bus and get in the front door, which is okay. It's part of the program, but is that all there is? Is that really the best way to address North Avenue? Is that what a future icon for this entire block really can do for the neighborhood, for the block, for the arrival, for all that? I really, really urge you to work very hard to make this whole entire front sequence as intentional as it possibly can be, from each corner of the lot to where all the entries of the buildings are, and make them feel intentional. Like Kevin was even mentioning, like, when does one decide to go into this entry versus that entry or versus the other one, unless they're like specifically dropped off at the front door and pointed to that door? With that creation of that plaza, you have to allow for these layers of activity that happen, for people that are going to be waiting to meet somebody, for people who are arriving in different modes of transportation or by foot. All that needs to be sort of woven here. And you have the opportunity to do it twice. Once in a meadow setting and once with a much stronger urban edge. It just needs to be very intentional and it just needs to be very clear. Not random. Like, it cannot be just, oh, these shapes look cool and they look dynamic. It can be a circle, but we decided it would be an angular shape. Either one would work for me as long as it really connects significant pieces or has any kind of a pathfinding, wayfinding, hierarchy building part to it. So that's really the extent of my comments when it comes to the site and the overall approach. I unfortunately can't provide much comments for the building. I don't think there's enough information presented. Right now, I know there's a 2-story volume and a 1-story volume. And there's like this really intriguing outdoor balcony and deck, which I think is a great feature of the design. But there's just not much else to comment on. There was a slide sort of with the materiality, which looked very interesting and exciting. It's just, it's hard to understand how one really experiences or understands the building. The elevations are never really necessarily that helpful. They're sort of flat drawings of what in this case is a more dynamic building. One thing I would mention, though, is what I noticed in some of the renders is that back facade, the one that's at the overlook, appears to be very solid, very tall, and very oblique. And it seems like from this entire landscape, you're going to have views back into the building. And I wonder if you can use it as an opportunity, even if you don't get more glazing in it, because it doesn't quite work with, say, an exhibit environment, is that a wall that can also continue the storytelling and you can introduce another element to it. But in general, I do think to the extent to which the exhibit space can allow you to do that, opening views into the garden from those spaces would be really wonderful, because you are doing a lot to create this environment in the back portion of the site. And even if it's not announced in any grandiose way, so it doesn't distract from the exhibit, I wonder if there's a way to allow for some of these very carefully crafted previews, because at some point people were like, oh, I want to go there after this. And really just to let, as part of some of your initial strategy, this interior, exterior kind of experience and connection of people to the natural environment actually play out. And right now there's a very hard edge between building and landscape. in the front and in the back. That's the extent of my comments. I'd like to offer Kevin Storm the opportunity to share his comments as well. Kevin, what are your thoughts on the project?
Thanks. I mean, I think it was clear from like some of my questions. I already was conveying some of my comments. It was a little bit of a blend, and I think Pavlina you just articulated, I think much more clear way, sort of where I was sort of beginning to hint at with that, with the North Avenue, just the orientation of the building, what was kind of troubling me, and I realized there is very much a sort of an arbitrariness to it, and in some ways, just and again, that this isn't necessarily like you to say like you should be layering your phasing in a way that is like more efficient or that kind of thing, but there is something when I look at the plan, there is to me like just an interesting thought experiment about just like what if the main new building attached to one or the other, right? Have redundant elevators and stairs. You probably have staffing efficiencies, and then instead of having two evenly sized or similarly sized urban meadows, you have a larger space that you can treat in a much more intentional way. And maybe that intentional way, taking what Pavlina said one step further, is like, what if that's a place where you actually can active? Maybe it's not just, maybe it's a combination of planting and open space where you can sort of test out and pilot sort of outdoor programs. Like, what if you had the ability to set up like a tent there for events, or what if you had the ability to have like a block party or a farmer's market, or a place where you showcase some, when you finally do have to, harvest the demonstration garden, a place to kind of have a picnic and eat food together in a way that, I don't know, just it seems like it could be an interesting way to kind of activate that space in its sort of interim state before it gets that last phase. So, and I think by having two evenly sized, you're kind of locking yourselves into this kind of weird symmetry that isn't really 100% necessary here. And I think it's also reflected in the fact that you end up with sort of like two parking areas, and like it's just it seems like the maybe being a little bit looser on the site and connecting to one of the buildings, and at least eliminating some of the ambiguity about like what these three things are. Because right now, to me, it doesn't feel like I don't understand how anyone would really know that those three things are even all related. I think there's probably a strength in communicating outwardly that this museum has many things, right, and many interesting things, and they're all kind of related. So I don't know, how one could do that. And I think one way is a consistent language to the public realm, and I know that you all described a principle around minimalism and simplicity, but to me, I don't see that anywhere. I think that's not, if that's what you're achieving, you're not getting there, and if that's what you really, or maybe that's not what you really want, in which case you should alter the language of your principle, because there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of arbitrary form making, as Pavlina just described. There's I think when you try to do a little bit of everything, and there isn't like a consistent language, and maybe one of the things that you can do to help knit these disparate pieces together is through a more consistent language. I do love to me, one of the most successful drawings was this kind of like the layering of the landscape elements and this kind of bigger picture that really helped me understand like the idea about like how you're treating the site. And so I totally agree with the previous comments about that, and I also totally agree with the comments about the fencing. It's a much better approach, this one, and I love this idea of maybe setting it back just a bit beyond a first tier of landscape, and really just making it feel much more sort of blended into the landscape. And I do think it will be a nice amenity for the neighbors to kind of look over. So I do think that's a really positive approach. And regarding the architecture, it's not super developed yet, but I do think it looks civic, which I think is kind of great. Like this doesn't always happen. I mean, I think the fact that it kind of has a presence and a civic quality, and that sort of that second floor terrace idea is really, could be really beautiful. And you can imagine walking by and seeing people up there, seeing an event happening up there. I think that's really a really great element. And so I think you're seems like you're moving generally in a good direction on that in terms of its like scale and feel. But I guess more to be seen on that. One very kind of minor comment on the front. You talked about taking the edge of the street trees that are usually in a planting strip, and you move them back. I think you can actually do both. I think you can like add another row or two of trees, and I'm not opposed at all to like a setback. I think it's actually, you're right, with all these people coming out of the buses, it makes a lot of sense. But I still think maintaining that edge of the street trees is an important sort of contributor to like the overall continuity of the streetscape, and a feeling of safety as people are walking on sidewalks. like hopping up over the curb and hitting them, that kind of thing. That anyways, that's sort of a minor point, but I do think that the idea of the setback makes sense. But there's still, again, just to reemphasize that point about the continuity of this block, of that edge, it just seems fragmented, and I'm just afraid that a potential worst case scenario is that it looks like there was these sites cleared on either side of it that were just never completed, and that there isn't a sort of like an intentional sort of use for those two urban meadow sites. So I think that's for me like the biggest challenge you have moving forward. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your thoughts on the project?
Sure, thank you. So I think much of what I wanted to say has been said already, so I'll try not to repeat much of it. But nonetheless, first let me just say it's wonderful to see a project like this developing in Baltimore, and particularly this area of Baltimore. I think it's necessary, as I pointed out earlier, but I also think that it's essential, not just in terms of the work that's been done already or the work that the team is doing, but mostly it serves as a major inspiration for the greater community, specifically this area as well. But I also think as well, the design team needs to take that challenge all the way through, recognizing that site is everything. Where the building sits on the site, how the building sits on its site, how it relates to its neighbors. You've been handed a very critical challenge here. Why? Because you've only got so much frontage onto the main drag, North Avenue. And then the majority of the site is kind of wedged in between these alleys that kind of describe the backyards of, some kind of a building stock that's there today. Whether or not much of that is in a state of decay or not, the point is, you've heard the term build it and they will come. Well, this is a case where you introduce something as important as a community space like this. Immediately, it will change the character of everything else that's around. So with that in mind, that brings us back to the point of the need to crank the building on the site. And, I'll just say it very simply. I don't think it's necessary. It's not necessary. On the one hand, you can try to make the argument that, well, it's responding to the topography of the area. But, quite frankly, we're in a technology today where we have the ability to build anything, right? And, we have the ability to manage cost in different ways. We just need to recognize how to do that. I think one of the critical pieces here, as you've heard from the other panelists, is by cranking the building this way, yes, you may agree it's responding to topography issues, and you're kind of creating this sort of a forecourt so folks can arrive, make decisions on where they need to go, wait for somebody. If they're huge bus loads, they're not kind of spilling onto the street, so there's some safety concerns there. So I do agree you need some kind of a front court. But I really think if the building were rectilinear in terms of its organization and in terms of its orientation to the street, you will have better opportunities to resolve many of the challenges that are associated with the site. One, the phasing, and you've heard that. You certainly don't want this building to, sit on a block because it's so big and the anchors at the corner are so small when compared to what you're proposing here. I've used this on other reviews before. You run the risk of just the block appearing as though they're missing teeth here. So you got to be very careful about that. And I understand the approach in terms of introducing the meadows, the urban meadows. I kind of agree with that concept. It serves as an appropriate interim solution until, those portions of the block are infilled with additional program. I do like the idea that Kevin just tossed out there in terms of having your building attached to one side or another, because it begins to resolve, again, some of the issues that are associated with the site. The biggest challenge for me on the site is, aside from cranking, I don't know that the location of the amphitheater is really the right location on the site. I think it creates such compression, and the fact that you have to work your procession through that area, it's very steep there. And I don't know that everyone will really enjoy that procession. I like the procession through the building. You're kind of bringing them back to that main entry hall area. And then from there, you work your way to the outside. That makes sense to me. But maybe if the building were more rectilinear, right, and somehow, in its interim phase, that meadow area visually begins to connect with that kind of a side yard area, then it begins to make a little bit more sense. Quite frankly, when you look at the arrangement as it is now, as it's presented as if you have a front yard, you have a building, and you have a backyard, right? Which is kind of contrary to what I think the use of this building really portrays. Again, I think there are other ways you can kind of organize the configuration and the massing of the building to really take and leverage the idea of procession. You arrive in this forecourt, you work your way into a portion of the building where you will now be instructed or curated or guided around the griot. Good. And, the griot being centralized to the building, I think, is really essential. Aside from the exhibit itself, I think you probably got that one right, okay, in terms of where it's located. But then as you move through the exhibit area, and, I'll just attribute this to maybe I just don't know enough about how you've organized that because it wasn't presented today. All right. So I'll kind of leave it in that box. But as you kind of work your way through the exhibit area, is the exhibit all centralized? Is it similar to the wax museums that we see everywhere else across the country? Is there something different about it that, separates portions of that? These are the things I think I would need to know, because I think these are the pieces that would begin to inform the other critic that I have, the other issue that I have, which is the indoor-outdoor relationships. And you heard Pavlina just briefly mention that. So assuming that the building is set up so that you have the forecourt area, then you have the building, meaning on the site, then you have the building with all of or most of the program, and if that program still allows you or does not preclude the ability to add buildings, as infill pieces to connect to the two end anchors, then that leaves you with the back. And that kind of an overlook area, I love that area. But I'm disappointed in terms of how it's handled related to the building. There's got to be some way some portions of the exhibits can be viewed from that overlook area. So that overlook area, to me, you need to leverage that to do double duty in terms of allowing folks to come to that area and not only experience what's happening in the barn and everything else out, but certainly a more deliberate and intentional relationship to what's happening on the inside. Perhaps a portion of what's happening on the inside needs to open out onto that area. I'm imagining it's terraced. I think I saw it being terraced, which I like. But also it should serve as kind of an area where you can kind of now come out, pause, look towards the barn, etc. And maybe the amphitheater should be somewhere in that location. You see what I'm getting at? And I know it seems as though you're trying to capitalize on this sort of a circuitous procession, but sometimes certain features belong in very discrete areas, very specific areas. And if the barn is meant to be having shows, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a location where artists have the ability to express certain things there. I don't know. But the fact is, you've got this huge lawn area. Maybe that's another feature that should be considered. And that's where perhaps this kind of an amphitheater becomes nothing more than just a terrace seating area where folks can sit there informally, folks can sit there in a formal manner and experience anything that's occurring on the lawn. It can be people watching, it can be conversation, it could be something as important as, a story being told. So I think these are the things I think you got to kind of go back and refine But all of this really begins and starts with, how that building sits on the site. And I think there are better opportunities to kind of take advantage of that. You've talked about being, biophilic design, and what better way to do that in terms of really trying to integrate more of what's on the outside into the building itself. The other challenge is, we refer to it, we know the program here is all about blacks and wax, but again, the main exhibit area, I'm not getting or feeling or seeing any sort of architectural or design features that begin to really tell me how you house in that exhibit. There's an importance that's associated with that, and I don't believe that it's coming out here in the design. Good, and maybe it is there. Maybe you've thought about it. Maybe you have ways of expressing that. But I think it's not very clear to me, certainly, how that's being achieved. And then finally, the architecture of the building. If you can probably go to maybe the North Street facade or one of the three-dimensional views, I must commend you. The form here is very engaging. It's bold. I don't know if the intent was to consider something that has some kind of a historical pretext. I don't know. Or something that's reflective of the heritage and the culture, African American culture. I don't know, but the point is, it's a very bold form, and it's engaging to the extent where it could be very provocative on the imagination, right? So I get all that, and the fact that the soffit is expressed in such a lovely manner, I think that's wonderful. The challenge that I'm having, though, is, and I think it kind of shows up in that elevation at the top, the roof elements kind of reach out, good, and perhaps it's going to be a much better read when those infill lots are filled in with the other buildings. But right now, I'm a little bit torn because I'm not sure where the front of the building is, right? And I know it's on North Avenue, but in a way, the roof structure kind of defers to those elements off to the corners, particularly the one to the left. It's a historic mansion, it has its certain history, and, you have to also be careful because, an architect can potentially misconstrue this to mean that, well, you offer in deference to that building, and there's a cultural contradiction that can occur there, right? Because here it is, you're really building a very strong and powerful museum type structure, which has certain kind of cultural connotations to that. So you have to be careful how you do that. And maybe one way to avoid that is perhaps instead of having the fascia of that roof be flat along North Avenue, maybe that edge also can begin to kind of curve up and really create more of a meaningful type of a kind of a non-directional and more universal type of an expression. Good. So that's one thing to consider. In addition to that, again, the backside, it's all blank. There's not much kind of openings, certainly at the ground floor. And then I understand the upper floor is the Maryland room. But based on this image and a few other images that I saw as you went through the slides, it seems to me that everything to the west, which would be to the right on the screen, would have the ability to connect at multiple levels, whereas everything towards the mansion connects only at the lower levels. So I'm imagining that's kind of the intent. But nonetheless, the architecture is what it is. You've selected, a certain kind of materials, a certain kind of an expression, the roof structure. Just be careful, though, and I'm saying this not in a critical manner. I'm saying this in in a cautious manner, because images do matter. Just be a little bit careful, because as you kind of work through the articulation of this main structure, it potentially run the risk borderline of looking similar to the types of institutional facilities that you see in the Delaware area, right? The Delaware Valley. There are institutional facilities there that serve like DOT and so forth, and they have this kind of a connotation, or they convey this kind of imagery. So just be very careful of that, okay? I think one of the things you may want to do is kind of dig a little bit deeper into the heritage and the culture of what the museum is expressing, and see if there are any sort of language, and not necessarily motifs, but language that you can particularly reinterpret and better integrate that into the massing and the design of this facility, particularly so you have the opportunity to kind of make the expression unique to its purpose and unique to the site that you're on. There's some other kind of awkward moments that I'm noticing in the facade. If you can go to the west-facing facade, there was an image, yeah, and when you kind of look at how the roof structure begins to shape itself and sit above the exhibit area, you're kind of adopting, again, this sort of a unique approach to the roof and how you deal with the fascia. It's not necessarily new, but it's unique in this application. One consideration here is, as you kind of look at that west facade, maybe the second block close to the back, you look at how the glazing under the roof meets the brick there. Perhaps that needs to be dropped a little bit and, shown as stepped, as opposed to the way it's showing there. It's neither here, it's neither aligned. You did reference there are certain datums that carry through, but I think that's only applying along the North Avenue facade. You need to kind of pay attention to that as well on this west-facing facade. And then that little piece up at the top on the roof there, I really don't know, the bottom image. Yeah, that little piece at the top, I don't know what it is, because as I kind of track around, as I track around the roof, I'm not even seeing how that's resolving itself. So, I can only say these are things that we would need to better understand. On one hand, I think your material selection is interesting. There's a lot of earthy type materials here. Maybe that's a recall to some of the heritage that's associated with the purpose of the museum. I don't know, but it's not explained, so I can't really react to it much. But again, my biggest challenge is how the building sits on the site, the ensuing spaces that are outdoors, and the need to better express what the actual purpose and the exhibits of the museum are. And I think you have the ability to do that by slightly tweaking the procession and how everything comes as you come through the building and you relate to the site. But nonetheless, I'm excited about this project. I am African American, so there's a sensibility associated with the project, and I trust that the design team can really kind of go back, reflect on this a little bit more, and really come back with a better organized set of graphics, and certainly a solution that's really befitting of the heritage and the weight that you have to carry and convey moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Osborne, for your thoughtful comments. As promised, I want to give the design team an opportunity to add any final comments as well, if you'd like.
No, I just appreciate all of your comments. It's always nice to get fresh eyes on a project. We've been working on it for a long time, so thank you very much. I appreciate all your thoughtful comments and consideration today.
Thank you, Kristen.
Can you, in your whatever you write up, Pavlina, were you talking about the angles out here as well?
From my comments, yes, the
Yes.
angles
Okay.
there into the sidewalk, yeah.
Okay.
That they can be reworked in a way that perhaps start to engage the arrival from the corners, the arrival from the parking area, so that they're very intentionally relating to things in the site within this language that you've established. Thank you all so much for your time, for your work,
Thank you.
for your vision. We really look forward to seeing this continue to develop. And up to our next meeting. I'm handing it over to Caitlin and the planning department team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for
Thank you. We appreciate it.
taking notes, and we'll be forwarding the notes to the design team shortly. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Have a good one, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.